Hey everyone, welcome back to the XG Academy for 2021. My name is Grant Lamb from the Sophos Sales Engineering team, and in this video we'll be talking about managing traffic through the XG firewall. Whether you've got experience from other firewall vendors or even from our own UTM-9 platform, there are quite a few things that the XG does differently, so this video should act as a useful guide to help you navigate some of these differences and get yourselves started correctly. What we'll go through is we'll start off with just some of the basic network and routing configuration, just so you guys can get your connectivity set up. Then we'll jump into the rules and policies and how we actually manage that. Once we've got a good grasp on all of those topics, we'll move into a quick example scenario of a kind of typical use case and see how you can apply the rules to get traffic manipulated the way you want. And then also showcase some of the built-in tools that we have with the XG to help you guys troubleshoot and verify traffic. So let's start off with the network configuration. So if I jump over to my XG firewall, we get to the dashboard. When you do the initial setup, you do jump through a quick setup wizard. So that'll get you some of your basics set up with a LAN interface and a WAN interface. But if you want to do anything on top of that, which you probably do, that's going to be over under configure and in the network section. So it'll jump you over to a list of your interfaces. This is where you'll see those initial WAN connection and LAN connection that you set up. But if you want to add any additional interfaces, you'll see those as kind of unbound, disabled. So you can just click on any of these physical ports and configure them from here. So if you're coming from a UTM-9, you will notice that the XG is now zone-based. So this gives you another way to help organize and classify the traffic in your environment. So I could say drop this into the LAN zone and then add an IP address, or put this into the WAN zone and give it a gateway for a remote uplink. So that's how you would add interfaces. On top of physical interfaces, you can add much more. So under the add interface button here, this is where you would add Ethernet bridges, IP address aliases, VLANs, port aggregation, or if you're using our remote Ethernet devices, this is also the same section that you would set that all up. One thing I'll point out is if you want to expand from just the default zones that we provide, under the zone section, you can quickly add another zone and assign interfaces to that. There is also a WAN link manager. So if you have multiple uplinks, I've only got one, but if you have multiple, then this is where you would decide, how you want to handle the different uplinks. Do you want one to be, active and another one backup, or do you want them both active and you can load balance across them? So when you select one of these gateways, this is where you can decide whether it's an active or backup connection, the weighting of that particular uplink, and then the failover rules is the decision when it's going to fail over to one of the backup connections. So in my case, if I'm unable to ping a particular IP address over that port, then we'll shift over to a backup connection. Aside from that, there's just a couple quick things for kind of typical networking connectivity. So DNS, this is going to be the DNS servers for your XG firewall, so you can add in your domain controller or whatever DNS server you have. And then for DHCP, that's under the DHCP section. This is where you'll set up your servers or relays for particular ports. This is also where you can see a really handy list of all the leases that you've been given out, or that you've given out. So if you're wondering what a particular device, what address that received, you can see that under the DHCP section. So that's network connectivity. Let's take a quick look at some of the routing. This one will be quick as well. It's a really short section. So under networking, there's another routing section. So you do have static routes, of course. There's also dynamic routing, so you can tie this in with BGP, OSPF, or RIP if you're using that in your environment. The one main thing I'll highlight in this section is going to be the SD-WAN policy routing. So this is where you can take particular traffic that you classify and route that over a specific gateway. Again, if you have multiple uplinks. So the way this would work is you'd add a new rule here, you'd give it a name, and you just decide on which traffic you want to select. So that can be based off of the incoming interface, or by source, destination, network, particular service. You can even do specific applications or even users or groups, and then route that over a selected primary gateway and even a backup gateway. So that's how you would set up your SD-WAN policy routes. While we're on the topic of setting up your routes, when it comes to enabling that for particular zones, that's actually done through something called device access. So say I did set up BGP, OSPF, or any other dynamic routing protocol. I'll have to go and make sure that under administration and device access that I have the dynamic routing service enabled for that particular zone. So if I want this running in my LAN, then I can enable it there, or for any other additional zones I set up. And just, I guess, while we're in this topic, any other service on the XG that you need to make sure is running on a particular zone, that's all listed here. So whether it's the web admin interface, SSH access, authentication services, that's all assigned per zone and done through device access. So let's move on and actually jump into the rules and policies on the XG firewall. So rules and policies are going to be the biggest difference you'll notice when it comes to the XG firewall. And the reason for that is we treat our firewall rules as kind of the central point for applying traffic inspection and security. In other words, if I show you the rules and policies section here, while there are separate sections for web filter policies, application control policies, and those are all configured within their respective sections, those are only applied at the firewall rule. So while I can set up a particular web content control to say block particular websites, that won't take any effect until I've added that to one of my firewall rules here. So first thing when you're in the rules and policies section is that everything is top down first match. So I can really easily click and drag these rules around to reorder them as I see fit. And I can group them together as well. I've got a lot of rules to work with. When I'm reviewing my rules, I can really quickly see at a glance how much traffic is being handled by a particular rule, which source, destination, or service is involved, and what protection and features I have enabled for that rule. So when I hover over this section on the right, I can see that I have web filtering, application control, IPS, and some other policies enabled for this traffic. So that's how we classify things. Is first we see what traffic we want to handle, and then how we want to handle that traffic. So let's walk through a example firewall rule and see what that process kind of looks like. So first thing right at the top, you give it a name, select the position, and if you want to add it to a group, and what type of action you want to take, if you want to accept, drop, reject that traffic, and if you want to log that. Then in the next section is where you define your interesting traffic. So this would be purely based off zone if you'd like, or it could be tied down to a specific network or IP address, even during a scheduled time. Same thing with destination zones, so particular zone, network, IP address, or service. What we can do additionally is match user identity. So I could say if I have traffic coming from a particular zone and matches a particular user or group, then this firewall rule applies. So I have that ability as well and can be very granular with my firewall policies. There is also a section here for creating exclusions if you have particular networks or IP addresses that you don't want to have match this particular firewall rule. Then once you have all that set up, then you just decide how you want to handle all of that traffic. So first thing you can do is create a linked NAT rule. What this will do is take any of the traffic that you just defined. Whenever that's matched, it will NAT it in the same way. So you don't have to have two separate, a separate firewall rule and a separate NAT rule and make sure that both are defined in the same traffic. This has one place to define the traffic and you can apply NAT translation to that. And on top of that, you can throw in all the other security features. So web filtering, I can select a particular policy here. This is where I would apply that. Application control, these are all my application control policies, which would be under the application section, but I apply them here at the firewall rule. Same with QoS or IPS. I can decide whether or not I want to decrypt SSL traffic, utilize Sandstorm against zero-day threats, scan FTP for malware. All those security features would be applied here. This is also the same section where you would enable our security heartbeat. So this would be monitoring the health status of your endpoints if they have the Sophos Central Intercept X agent installed. And it gives you a more automated way to say if a particular endpoint, say, doesn't have a heartbeat or goes into a bad health status, then you can automatically lock them out from particular firewall rules purely based off of the health status. So that's synchronized heartbeat down here. Now, when I am in one of these rules, say I do jump in here and I need to add a new firewall policy, or I need to change one of my firewall policies or web policies, sorry. Then I don't have to go and jump into the web protection section and modify the policy, lose all my progress, then jump back in and redo the firewall rule. We have a lot of nested configuration built in, so I can jump in here and take my default workplace policy, click the edit button, and that'll open up a nested web policy configuration in the same section. So again, I don't have to jump through different areas of the UI to get to where I need to go. So in here, it's a full editor. I can move these up and down. I can add new categories, allow, block, create exceptions as needed. I can even go in here if there's particular activities that I've defined. I can add a new activity, modify some of the existing activities as they are, and do that all from within the firewall rule. Save all my changes, jump back through, save all these changes, and I've now modified my web filter policy from within my firewall rule. So that nested configuration, the single point to define interesting traffic, just makes the whole process for applying security a little more streamlined when it comes to the XG. So that's how you'd set up a firewall rule. I'll cancel out of here. But let's take a closer look at NAT rules. So while you can do the linked NAT rules like I mentioned, and those will be easily identifiable with this little chain link icon, and it'll show you which firewall rule it's linked to, you still do have the ability to set up separate NAT rules if you prefer that kind of flexibility, or if it better suits your environment. So you could say have a separate generic NAT rule to match all your outbound traffic, and then specific linked NAT rules for particular firewall rules. You can definitely do that. That's all under the NAT rules section. So you really easily see kind of the original traffic that you're defined, how it's going to be translated, and if it's particular to any interface. Another thing I like to see in here is that you can track the usage of a particular NAT rule. So whether or not that's working, that's another way you can see the actual usage of that rule. This is a little bit outside of the scope of this video, but there are also your SSL and TLS inspection rules within the rule and policies section. This is where you would define what traffic you want to decrypt and how you want to decrypt that SSL traffic. So with all that in mind, that's how you set up rules. That's how we handle applying filtering to any of the traffic through the firewall. Let's quickly jump through a kind of example scenario and see how we can configure that with the XG firewall. In this scenario, let's say I have a regular network that I want to provide internet access to using the default WAN IP, but there's a specific host that I want to treat differently. I want this one to appear from a different external address, and also give it a different web filter policy so that it doesn't have access to sophos.com. So how can I set this up with the XG firewall? 3 main steps. 1, just set up the additional address as an alias for the WAN interface. Then create 2 separate firewall rules so that we're handling the regular network and the specific host differently. And then make sure that there's separate NAT rules for each of them. 1 giving the specific host that extra address we set up. So in the XG, I can jump over to the network section. This is where I can quickly add that additional address. So I'll add an alias here, put that onto port 2, which is my WAN interface. Save that. And that'll be populated under the list of addresses for that port. So you can see that right here. 192.168.1.200 is referenced as port 2:0. Now I can go over to my rules and policies, and I can add a new firewall rule. So let's set this up for the main network. So my main network policy, I'll put that at the top of my list for now because I just have some other rules at the moment. I won't throw that into any particular group, but I will log that traffic. Then I'll specify my LAN zone, anything coming from my LAN network. If I'm ever curious what one of these definitions is, I can easily hover over them and see what network this is defined. Then I'll specify the WAN as the destination to any host. Won't be doing anything like user identity, but I can create a link to NAT rule here and just give this a generic mask. So the default mask policy will just use the address of the outbound interface. So in this case, the default IP of my WAN interface. I can save that NAT rule. And for web filtering, I'll apply default workplace policy. I can, of course, go in here and add any other additional policies I want, any other traffic filtering. But I'll just go ahead and save this rule as it is. And then the next step, set up that additional rule for the specific host. So you can see my main network policy is now at the top. I can add a new rule here. I'll put this and make sure it's above the more generic rule that I set up. I won't add this to group either, but this will be my specific host policy. Throw that into the LAN. And in here, I can create a definition on the fly if I don't have one already. So I can hit create new, create IP address, and punch in the that specific host IP. There we go. And for the destination, I'll put the WAN as well. I'll create a linked NAT rule here. So under here, I'll need to make sure I specify that that additional address. So here I can make one for port 2:0. This address is going to be 1.200. Can save that, and there's my NAT policy. For web filtering, I'll go in here and I can create a new web filter policy right on the fly. Again, this can block Sophos.com. And under here, what I've done is I've gone ahead and created a custom user activity. What this is doing is just has a list of URLs, which includes Sophos.com. So I can select custom user activity, make sure that the action is set to block, enable this, and then go ahead and save this new policy. Or the name already exists. So let's just block site Sophos.com, give it a new name. So that's saved. I've got my filtering, got my NAT. I can save this firewall rule. And in a moment, there we go. We've got our two new rules, one at the top for the specific IP and one for the main network. So now let's test it out. So first thing I'll do is bring over my two hosts here just to demonstrate and generate some traffic. We can see that I have one particular host in the main network, so .111. Then I also have that specific host that I set up, the .21. So if I open up a browser for this specific host, sophostest.com should be blocked, which it is under custom category. And then back on the main machine, navigating to sophostest.com does work. So we can test it out that way. That's the best case if you actually have access to these devices. But let's say you don't. Say you're doing this remotely and you don't actually have a way to test this with the live workstations. So instead, what I can do is go onto my XG firewall. Once I've set up my policies, I can open up the log viewer. That'll open up this separate window here, and I can do a policy test to actually test what is going to happen with particular traffic. So if I'm going to sophos.com, I can even test with a user identity. But I'll say for my firewall rules and web filter policies, what happens if I'm coming from 40.21. And this will show you which firewall rule it's hitting, what the action is, and why. So I can see we're hitting firewall rule number 13. The result is to block that based off of the custom category and this particular rule in the web filter policy. If I flip that over to .111, you'll see that we get a different firewall rule with a different action. So this is one quick way to verify that you're hitting the right rule that you expect and the action is being taken properly. Another way you can do this based off of live traffic is just under the actual log viewer here. So I'll have the first page you get to is the firewall, but you can view a bunch of different other logs based off which facility you're looking for. However, for this traffic, I can filter based off, say, source IP, look for that specific address, and I'll be able to see right here where the traffic is and what particular rule it's hitting, and even the NAT rule, so I can know whether or not I'm hitting the correct NAT rule. For any of these, if I click on this firewall rule ID and I filter by the firewall rule, that will take us over to our rules and policies in the main XG UI, and I can see exactly what firewall rule that is. Similarly with the NAT rule, I can filter by that NAT rule, and that'll jump me over to my NAT rules, and I'll see exactly which one is being applied, which in my case is the correct one for port 2:0. If you want to get a little more advanced, there are some other options here as well. I can perform a packet capture to actually view live traffic as it runs through the firewall. So I can click Open PCAP. This will open another section here with our packet capture tool. So this will be done through the log viewer, or I can access this through the UI under the diagnostics section. So diagnostics packet capture. If you're familiar with TCP dump, we use the exact same syntax here for the filters. So I can say host 172.16.40.21. I'm going to save, enable this, and if I generate some traffic here, say reload the page, that will show up here. I'll be able to see what the inbound and outbound ports are and which NAT rule and firewall rule we're hitting. So this is another way you can view and verify that traffic on your own. Another way, if you'd like, is you could do it with the reverse way. If I search for the destination instead, this will allow us to see the source address that we get translated to. So if again I go back here and reload that page, let's see if we pick up any traffic here. So you can see let me filter this a little even further here. Actually, let's just do a display filter for port 4. Let's do port 4. I have some other traffic going on, but here we go. So you'll see, for example, our source address going outbound to sophos.com. That is then translated to the correct address, which goes outwards, and then we'll see any responding traffic coming back on that address as well. So another way to verify that traffic is taking the correct path through the firewall. So thank you very much for watching, everybody. I hope that was useful in terms of seeing some of the differences with the XG, how we handle things, and how you can go about accomplishing different rules and policies within the XG firewall. If there's any questions or feedback, feel free to reach out to us at globaltraining@sophos.com. Thanks.